The sound of drums filled the palace hall. The villagers gathered in their best clothes couldn't believe what they were seeing. "Is that really Ada?" one woman whispered, her mouth open in shock. "It can't be," another replied. "How could she be queen?" The grand doors opened and there she was. Ada, the girl they used to mock and ignore, walked in wearing a golden crown. Her dress sparkled, and she walked with a confidence no one had ever seen before. The crowd gasped. Some even stepped back. This was the same girl who used to sit quietly by herself, the one people avoided. Now she was the queen of the land. "Look at her," an old man muttered, shaking his head. Who would have thought this could happen? Ada walked to the front of the hall and turned to face the crowd. Her eyes swept over the room, pausing on the faces she remembered from her past. But she didn't look angry or upset. Instead, she stood tall and proud. The royal announcer's voice rang out, "Behold your queen, Ada," a ruler of courage and hope. The villagers stared in disbelief. How had this happened? How could the girl they had mocked rise to such a place? No one could have imagined that the girl everyone mocked would one day rule over them. But how did it all happen? Ada smiled faintly and spoke. "I know you're wondering how I got here. Let me tell you my story." Ada was born in a small village nestled between hills and a wide, lazy river. The village was beautiful, with mud houses painted in earthy colors, narrow paths lined with palm trees, and a lively market square. But for Ada, life here was anything but beautiful. Unlike the other girls, Ada's face didn't fit the village's idea of beauty. Her skin was darker than most, her nose broader, and her eyes sat deep under heavy brows. While others were called pretty or charming, Ada grew up hearing words like strange and unlucky. "Don't stare at her too long," an old woman once whispered to her granddaughter at the market. "She's cursed." Ada's parents, Nana and Ibire, weren't much help. Her mother often sighed loudly when Ada walked into the room. "Why can't you at least try to look decent?" she'd say, shaking her head. Her father hardly spoke to her at all, as if ignoring her presence would make her disappear. The only person who ever showed Ada kindness was her grandmother, Mama Nkechi. Mama Nkechi had a wrinkled face and a voice like soft rain. She'd often call Ada to sit with her under the big mango tree behind their house. "Don't listen to them, my child," Mama Nkechi would say, stroking Ada's hair. "You have something they don't, a strong heart and a sharp mind. One day they'll see it too." But even with Mama Nkechi's love, Ada couldn't escape the constant taunts from her peers. "Hey, ugly duckling," a boy shouted one day as she walked past the well, carrying a clay pot of water. The other children burst into laughter. Ada bit her lip and kept walking, her eyes fixed on the ground. As she grew older, things didn't get easier. Suitors came to the village, looking for wives, but none stopped at Ada's house. At family gatherings, her cousins whispered behind her back, and her aunts sighed dramatically, saying, "What will we do with this one?" The village itself was a place of strict traditions. Elders sat in the square every evening gossiping about who did what and who failed to meet the community's expectations. Women were expected to marry well, men to provide, and children to obey. Ada, with her unusual looks and quiet nature, didn't seem to fit anywhere. Despite all this, Ada had a resilience no one noticed. While the village saw only her outside, Mama Nkechi saw the fire in her heart. And even though Ada didn't know it yet, life was about to give her the chance to prove everyone wrong. It started on a dusty afternoon in the village marketplace. The air was thick with the smell of roasted corn and freshly pounded yam, and the sound of merchants shouting over one another filled the air. Ada was there to buy a few things for her grandmother when a commotion broke out near the center of the square. A wandering seer, cloaked in layers of colorful fabric and holding a staff adorned with feathers, had appeared out of nowhere. She drew a small crowd as she stood beside the baobab tree, her voice ringing out in a sing-song chant. "Listen, listen. The winds carry secrets and the earth whispers truths," the seer said, her cloudy eyes scanning the crowd. "Among you lives the most unlikely of souls, a person you mock, a soul you reject. And yet, this very soul will bring glory to your village." The crowd erupted in laughter. "Glory? one man shouted, clutching his belly as he laughed. From who? That old beggar by the river? Maybe she means Ada, a teenage girl sneered, pointing toward Ada, who stood frozen near the yam seller's stall. Imagine that! The crowd roared with laughter and Ada's cheeks burned with humiliation. When Ada returned home, her grandmother was waiting under the mango tree. Ada recounted the incident, her voice trembling. Why does this always happen to me, Mama? Mama Nkechi's eyes sparkled with a mix of mischief and wisdom. And why not you, Ada? Prophecies often sound foolish until they come true. You really think I could bring glory to this village? Ada asked, skeptical. I believe you were born for more than this place allows you to see, Mama Nkechi replied. The prophecy stirred something deep inside Ada, though she didn't dare admit it. She carried those words with her like a tiny ember, tucked away but glowing faintly. A week later, fate took an unexpected turn. While returning from the river, Ada heard a loud cry from the nearby forest. At first, she hesitated, gripping her water pot tightly, but something urged her to move closer. There, tangled in a bush, was a man struggling against the thorny vines wrapped around his leg. His clothes were covered in dust, but Ada could tell they were finely made, too fine for anyone from her village. His face was strained with pain, and sweat dripped from his forehead. Please help me, he begged, his voice hoarse. Ada didn't think twice. She dropped her pot, grabbed a machete from the forest floor, and carefully cut him free. The man winced as she worked, but he thanked her profusely once he was freed. Can you walk? Ada asked. Barely, he admitted. Ada helped him to his feet, letting him lean on her shoulder as they made their way out of the forest. Who are you? She asked, glancing at his expensive shoes and the ornate ring on his finger. Just a traveler, he replied, avoiding her gaze. I was on my way to another village when I lost my way. Ada didn't press further. She brought him to her grandmother's house where Mama Nkechi treated his wounds with herbs and hot water. The man thanked them both and promised to repay their kindness. Little did Ada know the man she'd saved wasn't just a traveler. He was a prince in disguise, sent to the village by his father to learn humility and understand the struggles of his future subjects. And her act of kindness had set into motion a chain of events that would change her life forever. The prince, now healed and introduced as Obi, stayed in the village under the pretense of being a wandering merchant. He said he was recovering from an unfortunate accident, though his true purpose was far more intricate. Obi observed the villagers and their ways, but it was Ada who truly caught his attention. Obi had watched her endure the ridicule of others, yet she never lashed out. Her kindness to him hadn't been a calculated act, but a reflex. That alone intrigued him. One evening, as they sat outside Mama Nkechi's house, the prince broached the topic. Ada, why do you let them treat you like that? She shrugged, poking the fire with a stick. What can I do? The way I look, the way I am. People don't see anything worth respecting. That's because they're blind, Obi said firmly. You're more than what they see. Ada snorted softly, thinking he was just being polite, but Obi wasn't finished. If you had the skills and knowledge to prove them wrong, would you use them? Her eyes flickered to his, uncertainty mingling with curiosity. What kind of skills? The next day, Obi introduced Ada to a traveling scholar named Ekene, a royal tutor he had summoned in secret. Obi claimed Ekene was an old friend who could teach her things that could open doors beyond their little village. At first, Ada hesitated. What would the villagers say if they saw her trying to learn things that didn't concern a girl like her? But Mama Nkechi encouraged her, as always. Wisdom is a seed, Ada. Let it grow, and no one can take it from you. The lessons began in the quietest corners of the forest, away from prying eyes. Ekene taught her to read, write, and speak with confidence. He taught her about the wider world, politics, history, and strategy. Obi, too, played his part, teaching her how to carry herself with dignity, how to negotiate, and even how to think critically under pressure. For the first time, Ada began to see herself differently. Months passed, and while Ada transformed internally, the villagers' scorn persisted. They mocked her every attempt to change. from the way she carried herself to the moments they caught her practicing her reading in the fields. But the real storm began when the drought struck. At first, the villagers assumed it was just a dry spell. Days without rain turned into weeks, then months. The river dwindled to a trickle, and the once lush farmlands became cracked and barren. The crops withered, livestock died, and hunger began gnawing at the villagers' spirits. Tempers flared as the people looked for someone to blame. It wasn't long before Ada became their target. "She's brought a curse upon us," shouted Neka, the village gossip, as people gathered in the square. "Trying to act like she's better than us. This is the gods' punishment." The villagers muttered their agreement. Some even threw stones at Ada's feet as she passed. Her confidence, painstakingly built over months, began to waver. "Why are you letting them push you down again?" Obi asked one evening as they sat under a tree. Ada's shoulders slumped. "How can I lead people who hate me? They'll never listen." "You don't lead because they like you," Obi replied. "You lead because they need you. Look around, they're desperate, and desperation clouds judgment. You can see clearly. Use that." His words stuck with her. The next day, she attended the village council meeting uninvited. The elders had been arguing for hours, debating whether to send people to a neighboring village for help. "It's too risky," one elder exclaimed. "If they refuse us, we'll waste precious time and energy." Ada raised her hand, surprising everyone. "What if we stop arguing and start working?" The elders scoffed. "And what does a child like you know about solving a drought?" Ada didn't flinch. "I know the elders say there's an abandoned spring in the forest. It may be dry, but what if it's not? We could dig. If we find water, we save ourselves." Her idea was met with resistance. "It's a fool's errand," someone shouted. "Then let it be my errand," Ada replied firmly. "I'll lead the effort. Anyone who's willing can join me." At first, only a handful of people volunteered, mostly younger villagers and a few outcasts like Ada. Mama Nkechi was, of course, among them. Together they ventured into the forest, finding the overgrown site of the ancient spring. The work was grueling. Days stretched into weeks as they dug through stubborn earth, encountering rocks, roots, and the occasional snake. The sun beat down mercilessly, and many gave up, sneering that Ada's plan was hopeless. But Ada persisted. She worked tirelessly alongside the others, using everything Obi and Ekene had taught her to keep spirits high. She organized shifts, scouted for food and water, and even devised a pulley system to make the digging easier. Meanwhile, tensions back in the village escalated. With the drought worsening, the council's indecision left people starving and fighting among themselves. When a neighboring village rejected their plea for help, despair set in. Some began to reconsider Ada's efforts. "Maybe that girl isn't so foolish after all," one villager muttered as whispers of her progress spread. Slowly, more villagers joined the digging effort. Even those who had mocked her before began to pitch in, driven by desperation and the faint hope that she might succeed. After weeks of relentless effort, there was a moment of silence as someone struck a hidden vein underground. A trickle of water seeped through the soil. The villagers froze, holding their breath. Then the trickle became a stream, and finally, a gush. Cheers erupted. People danced and laughed, their joy mingled with relief. Ada stood back, covered in dirt and sweat, watching the scene with a mix of pride and disbelief. For the first time, the villagers looked at her with something beyond begrudging respect. They saw her as a leader. That evening, Obi and Mama Nkechi watched Ada by the spring, her face illuminated by the glow of firelight. "She led them when no one else could," Obi said. Mama Nkechi nodded. "It's only the beginning." After the spring was discovered, the village celebrated Ada as a hero. For the first time, her name was spoken with pride rather than derision. Yet, amidst the gratitude, she felt a strange absence, the kind traveler she had saved months ago. He had left the village without saying goodbye. One morning, weeks after the village's drought had ended, a grand entourage approached the village. Ada, dressed in her simple yet neat clothes, joined the curious crowd gathering to witness the spectacle. At the forefront rode the traveler she had rescued, now adorned in royal attire. Ada's breath caught in her throat. Could it really be him? The villagers murmured in confusion. Why is a prince coming here? Dismounting with a flourish, the man, no longer a humble traveller, addressed the crowd. People of this village, he began, his voice strong and commanding. Many months ago, I came here in secret to understand the heart of our people. I was shown kindness by someone you deemed unworthy. All eyes turned to Ada as the prince's gaze settled on her. Ada, your bravery and kindness touched me deeply. You saved my life not knowing who I was. You gave me hope and wisdom when I needed it most. The prince then revealed why he had returned. This village once mocked what it did not understand. But today I declare that Ada has proven herself worthy of the greatest honor. He gestured to his attendants, who carried forth a royal gown, adorned with intricate embroidery and golden trims. You will be my queen, he said, his voice warm and resolute. Ada froze, overwhelmed. But I'm just Ada, she whispered, her voice barely audible amidst the stunned silence of the crowd. No, the prince replied, stepping closer. You are Ada, the woman who saved me, saved this village and showed the strength of a true queen. The prince and his entourage stayed in the village for several days, ensuring Ada was prepared for her new role. The royal seamstress crafted her gown, the tutors polished her etiquette, and Ada's grandmother, her eyes brimming with pride, guided her through the emotional journey. On the day of her coronation, the villagers gathered in the square, their faces a mix of awe and shame. Ada, now radiant in her royal attire, walked beside the prince with confidence and grace. As the ceremony concluded, the villagers approached Ada, their heads bowed in shame. One of the loudest mockers from her past, Necker, the village gossip, stepped forward hesitantly. Your Majesty, he began, his voice trembling, we wronged you. We failed to see who you truly were, and for that, we are deeply sorry. Ada's gaze softened, her regal composure unshaken. We all make mistakes, Obi, she said gently. But the true measure of a person is what they do once they realize their error. Let us not dwell on the past, but build a future where no one is treated the way I was. Ada's first decree as queen was revolutionary for the village. She implemented community-wide gatherings where grievances could be heard and solutions worked on collectively. She established schools where children were taught not only reading and writing, but also the values of kindness and respect. Under her rule, a system was created to ensure that no one was left behind. Orphans, widows, and the poor all found support within the community. The villagers, inspired by her wisdom and resilience, began to emulate her values, creating a more inclusive and harmonious society. Years later, as Ada stood on the balcony of her palace overlooking the village, her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. True beauty comes from within, my child. It's the strength of your heart and the kindness of your soul. Ada's journey taught everyone an invaluable lesson. It wasn't beauty that made her a queen. It was her heart, her courage, and her resilience. And in the end, the same villagers who once mocked her now saw her for who she had always been. A queen not just in title, but in spirit. Sometimes the most remarkable transformations begin with the simplest acts of kindness and the courage to believe in oneself. This story reminds us that it's not how others see you, but how you see yourself that defines your path in life. Ada's transformation was not just about outward beauty. It was the strength she found within herself to rise above the judgments of others and embrace her true worth. Have you ever underestimated someone, only to be proven wrong? Maybe you've faced your own challenges and doubts, only to overcome them and shine brighter than you ever imagined. We'd love to hear your story. Share your experiences in the comments below, and let's talk about how we can all learn to believe in ourselves just like Ada did. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.